Hello everyone, this is Aegon of Astora, and welcome back to Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore. This is episode 8, being recorded on Wednesday, August 12th, 2015, and I hope that each and every one of you out there is having a fantastic day today. So we find ourselves in the Cathedral Ward, and I hadn't initially planned to get any dialogue en route to where it is that we're going, but I believe that we actually do have some new dialogue here, so let's say hello to everyone.
Once the night of the hunt passes, suppose...
Yep, we already agreed to be the chapel dweller's buddy after the night of the hunt ends. I hope that he doesn't take it the wrong way, that I just kind of walked away from him, but let's say hello to Ariana.
Oh, hello. The whole town's turned, has it? Quite a big family now, aren't we? Though I'm afraid I seem to be the black sheep. Back for my blood, I presume? Oh, that's a pity. Anytime you're ready.
Well, thank you kindly. So, the bigoted old man in the previous episode did, despite his false consciousness, did point out something that's true, and that is that Ariana can hear the whispers, and she knows what, at least Adela and himself, and what the bigoted old man think of her. But yeah, we're not going to take any more of her blood because we don't want Adela to get jealous, which is kind of silly, but...
Oh. How did we ever get into this mess?
So the lonely old dear, she... If we're going to continue on with my, I guess, speculative lore about her, I think that at this point she's really just, she needs some sedatives. She has lived much of, recent years with them to help her deal with the recurring night of the hunt. But the fact that she's here, she doesn't seem to have access to any of them. But we're going to be returning to that storyline a little bit later on. And we're going to say hello to Mr. False Consciousness.
Oh, give it a rest, please. I've no time for your petty lies. What? Just go away now. I can't stand the stench of your lying breath.
So he's really in no mood to chat with us, and that's fine, because I don't really want to talk with him, so Hi Adela.
Brave hunter. Please, give me a little more time. There are others in need of my blood.
So it's funny that... Or is it that we still have her... It's because we still have her blood vial. So I presume that if we use it, she will, much like Ariana, offer to give us some more. But yeah, we got quite the ragtag group here, and we are still leaving that armor set there, and we're going to return to that. But for now, just note that we can see the Amygdala. I believe these are called the Lesser Amygdala. I'm not sure if that's a canonical name in any way, shape, or form, but I have heard them described as such in many different places, in fact. And now that we've got the Oedon Chapel dialogue out of the way, we're going to be heading to the Forbidden Woods. Now, it is going to be 2 or 3 episodes before we really get into the Forbidden Woods and begin to actually tease out why it is that these woods are, in fact, forbidden. We're heading there, however, to trigger a few important story events, but more on that in a little bit. In the meantime, I did want to show that now that we're over 40 insight, the church servants actually gain new attacks. So again, we're seeing things that were seemingly not there before. In the interest of time, we're going to fast forward here and a few more times during this episode. But we are going to pause briefly in a second coming up when we come across the brain sucker that's guarding the entrance to the Forbidden Woods. I wanted to assure you that we are going to be talking about the brain suckers at some point in the near future, but that is not today. But I did want to draw your attention to the fact that their attacks, and their grab attack in particular, does drain your insight. I really despise the brain suckers. We have already come here and grabbed I believe these were, or it was a twin bloodstone shard from that corpse there, which is once again someone wearing the Healing Church garb. This was a shining coin. Really smart that was actually placed there because it's trying to give you a hint about the area that's coming up. That is the Forbidden Woods, and it's rather labyrinthian and can be really, really easy to get lost in it. So if you use some shining coins, you can use them essentially as breadcrumbs. Figure out where it is that you've been and where it is that you haven't, if you just drop those occasionally. We haven't picked up any of these items, nor have we talked to this gentleman over here.
Oh, good to see you safe. Now, let's think up something to discuss. Just tell me what piques your interest.
So we've already spoken to him about the Healing Church and Bergenworth, and I don't believe he has any new dialogue there, but we do want to speak about the corrupted Vilebloods.
Ah, there's something I want to tell you. A bit of wisdom from the eminent master Logarius. Once, a scholar betrayed his fellows at Bergenworth and brought forbidden blood back with him to Canehurst Castle. It was there that the first of the inhuman Vilebloods was born. The Vilebloods are fiendish creatures who threaten the purity of the Church's blood healing. The ruler of the Vilebloods is still alive today. And so, to honor my master's wishes, I search for the path to Canehurst Castle. As you know, the Healing Church... But if I bid you farewell, it has been a pleasure. May the good blood guide your way.
So, thanks to Alfred, we now have what I believe may be our first explicit reference to Canehurst Castle. So, where does Canehurst fit into the story diagram that we've been putting together in past episodes? Well, you may recall first that in episode 6, our newly modified diagram looked something like this. And with the information we've just received from Alfred, and only that information, we're forced to make this diagram look a little bit more messy. And it would seem that in addition to triggering the Bergenworth schism, the discovery of the Old Blood also entailed the birth of what Alfred describes as the inhuman Vilebloods. This is a subject to which we will obviously be returning, but for now, that's all we know, so we're going to leave the diagram like that. Now, we find ourselves at the entrance to a forbidden place. So, let's see if we can't gain access, shall we?
The password. The password. The password. The password. The password. Password. He knows I'm at the door. Got to close the door. Close the door.
So that additional dialogue, which seems to be random whether or not he'll add that little bit, the second line of dialogue there at the end, I first saw that, I believe it was in Franz, A German Spy's casual couch playthrough of Bloodborne. And so that's why I repeated the dialogue 4 or 5 times until he said that, because I wanted to get that additional bit of dialogue, which is really unsettling, to say the least. So we're going to use the password that we learned through the memory with Lawrence, and also that was also inscribed on Vicar Amelia's pendant. And of course we see that the gentleman who was asking us for the password, or at least that's what seems to be the implication here, that this person is already dead. Really, really weird. And I'd be very interested to hear if any of you have any ideas, or if any of you are able in any way, shape, or form to make any sense out of that, because I've tried and I really can't. And as we fast forward once again, I'll just repeat one more time that we're going to be doing the Forbidden Woods either in episode 9, 10, or 11. It may be spread across a few episodes in part. I haven't fully decided how we're going to do that just yet. But that the purpose of our visit today, specifically, is to trigger the story event which leads Patches to provide us with the Tonsil Stone, so that we might gain access to hitherto inaccessible parts of the Dreamlands. What are the Dreamlands, you ask? Well, we'll get into that in just a minute as well. So let's talk a little bit about dreaming. You may recall that in past episodes, I have argued that in the world of Bloodborne, it is incredibly, incredibly difficult to distinguish dreams from reality. That the lines separating dreams and reality are almost irrevocably blurred. And that's my take as someone who is only vaguely familiar with H.P. Lovecraft and his works. And of course, as I'm sure many of you can guess where I'm going with this, but of course Redgrave is intimately familiar with many of H.P. Lovecraft's works. And so I'm going to be drawing on Redgrave in this episode as a way of talking about and thinking about the Nightmare Frontier.
Oh, a hunter of beasts, are you? Glory be, you know not the value you possess. But more's the pity. The hours of the night are many, and the beasts more than I can count. A veritable hunt unending. Not even death offers solace, and the blood imbibes you. A most frightful fate. Oh my. But I'm willing to do you a kindness. Step lightly round to the right of the great cathedral and seek an ancient, shrouded church. The gift of the Godhead will grant you strength. Yes, I'm unquestionably certain. Not even death offers solace, and the blood imbibes you.
Thank you, Patches. So yeah, somehow, after you enter the Forbidden Woods, I believe it's no matter which of the doors you knock on that have the incense burners outside, then no matter which door you knock on, Patches will be there, and he will gift you the tonsil stone. A latticed, deformed rock, or perhaps a meteorite, appears useless but possesses some odd gravitational force that prevents its riddance. A dubious soul once said, "Step lightly round to the right of the great cathedral, and seek an ancient shrouded church. The gift of the Godhead will grant you strength." So in addition to looking a great deal like a lattice deformed rock or perhaps a meteorite, it also kind of resembles the heads of the amygdala, or amygdalae. I'm not sure how to pronounce the plural version of that, and even though the Snatchers served as the, I guess, catalyst for the events of the previous episode, when I was kidnapped and taken to Yahar'gul, the Unseen Village, I didn't really talk all that much about the Snatchers themselves. And part of the reason for that is simply that I think it might be more interesting to do so after they're deceased, in talking about who they are and trying to figure out the reasons why they would have been dispatched with, seemingly. But yeah, we will talk about that when that time comes. So basically the next time we visit Yahar'gul, the Unseen Village. I'm uncertain about how deeply we're to read into what Patches just said to us, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least touch on the couple of the things that he said. So first, he aptly points out that we're currently enduring a veritable hunt unending, but also that not even death offers solace. So he recognizes us not merely as a hunter, but specifically as a Paleblood hunter. He recognizes that we're trapped in the cyclical night of the hunt, and also that we're bound to the hunter's dream, such that death offers no solace simply because we cannot die. We're bound to the dream. He also says that the blood imbibes you, and while I'm not entirely sure what to make of this line, it too seems accurate. That is, to imbibe is essentially to consume. So we're not consuming the old blood, we're being consumed by it. So while I'm hesitant, knowing who Patches is, to take the things he says too seriously, it also seems like he knows his stuff. He's in tune with the world in a manner that other NPCs don't seem to be. At the same time, he is, of course, trying to manipulate us. But to what end? As a sacrifice to Amygdala? I'm not entirely sure, but I am looking forward to hearing what each of you think. Lead Elixir. A heavy, syrupy liquid medicine. Temporarily shifts weight to make deflection of attacks easier, but must be used with care, as it also slows movement with no change to defense. Its recipe for this mysterious concoction is unknown, but some postulate that it materializes only within the most desperate nightmares. So that, in other words, is an item that came from what Redgrave describes as the Dreamlands. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But first, note that once again, now that we have over 40 insight, we can see this lesser amygdala here. Although this may in fact be the amygdala that we fight as a boss in the Nightmare Frontier, because that's how Patches refers to him in the cutscene we're about to watch. But it's really a different experience actually seeing the thing as it grabs you, rather than just having a vortex come out of nowhere and grab you.
Oh, Amygdala! Oh, Amygdala! Have mercy on the poor bastard!
So we have yet another insight gain, suggesting to us that this is an important place, and that there is, quite literally and figuratively, lots of insight to be gained here. But before we go on, there's going to be a few excerpts from Redgrave's The Paleblood Hunt today, and I'd like to begin with this one. Quote, "For Lovecraft, the act of dreaming was a method in which human beings could briefly transport their consciousness to an alternate dimension. The Dreamlands are not an illusion, they are a real place. The Dreamlands are a location just like Yharnam, Byrgenwerth, Cainhurst, or Yahar Ghul. The mere fact that the player can take items from the Dreamlands and bring them back to the waking world is proof that it's a place that is equally real." And more than that, Redgrave goes on to state that the Lecture Hall of Mensis has somehow been warped and transported into the Dreamlands as a result of the experiments of the School of Mensis. The lecture hall is connected to the nightmare, which consists of both the Nightmare of Mensis and the Nightmare Frontier.
What a joy it is to behold the divine. It must be such a pleasure. You're in my debt, you know. You're nigh on a beast of the field, but here you are, treading a measure with the gods. Are your feet as fat as your wits? Oh, cease this dithering. Take the plunge. Throw yourself to the wolves.
So he speaks more or less in antiquated cliches, but he does once again further perpetuate the opposition between beastliness and of being capable of comprehending things that are well beyond human comprehension. Putting Patches aside for now, though, we've yet to explicitly answer a very important question. That is, what is the School of Mensis? As Redgrave explains in the Paleblood Hunt, quote, "The School of Mensis, run by Mikolash, acted to serve as a replacement for Byrgenwerth for the Radicals. Mikolash was most certainly loyal to Lawrence at the beginning, as he continued to study the Great Ones in Willem's place for the Healing Church." End quote. As we can see here, our flowchart is getting messier by the minute. I'll probably have to truncate parts of this diagram so that we can discuss it as we go. And as we near the end of the series, I'll probably present a version that retains all of the messiness and complexity of the story, so that we can appreciate it all at once while actually staring at a messy diagram. But for now, we're going to start truncating as we go. We can see here that the radicals under Lawrence founded the Healing Church, and that the School of Mensis was founded in turn as a means of emulating and eventually surpassing Master Willem's research on the Great Ones. Indeed, the lecture hall is rife with evidence, physical, textual, and otherwise, that the School of Mensis worked tirelessly to pursue avenues of investigation that had hitherto not been touched outside of Byrgenwerth. This person wearing the holy shawl of the Healing Church. And we find the lecture theater key on his person. Key to the lecture theater in the lecture building. Today, the 2-story lecture building is adrift in the nightmare. But once it was a place of reflection where scholars learned of history and archaeology. Perhaps it still is, as the students in the lecture theater appear to await the return of their professor. So these students, these scholars, appear almost frozen in time, as does the lecture hall itself. At the moment, presumably, when the nightmare was beckoned. And this is a hunter corpse. So I don't know if this is actually meant to be a hunter. Seeing as we find the student uniform, is that meant to be a student and they just didn't use the student clothing on the model? I don't know. Starting to accumulate quite the wardrobe now. Student uniform. Uniform of the students of Byrgenwerth, a bygone institute. Learning. This alternative lacks the thick cape. The Healing Church has its roots in Byrgenwerth and naturally borrows heavily from its uniform design. The focus not on knowledge or thought, but on pure pretension, would surely bring Master Willem to despair, if only he knew. So you can see on the line breaks are screwed up on the student uniform. So it says a bygone institute learning when it means to say a bygone institute of learning. But the first line, they did the line break a word too late. But there's some eyeballs here, it looks like. Oh, crud. Once again. I need to remember to repair my weapons more frequently. Some eyeballs here. So they were clearly hoping to out Willem, to out Byrgenwerth. But they were not so successful, at least according to that item description. He actually has a beaker or a flask of some sort in his hand. Again, presumably waiting for their professor to return so that they can get working on their lab or whatever it was that they were doing. Really rather unsettling, these scholars. Augur of Abridus. Remnant of the Eldritch Truth encountered at Bergenworth. Use phantasms, the invertebrates known to be augurs of the Great Ones, to partially summon abandoned Abridus. The initial encounter marked the start of an inquiry into the cosmos from within the old labyrinth and led to the establishment of the choir. So that's something that we're going to be talking about in much greater detail when we actually are able to explore that part of the labyrinth, that part of the Chalice Dungeons. And that's another part of the reason why we're going to the Nightmare Frontier first, so that I can get my hands on the Ailing Lauren Chalice, so that we can continue in the Chalice Dungeons. See up here, this scholar is just hanging out. Guarding for some reason or another. Madman's Knowledge and sedatives. Oh, just Madman's Knowledge. And we've now arrived at the Nightmare Frontier. And while I would have liked to have started immediately by discussing the significance of this area, it also immediately occurred to me that this is one of two areas in the game which has a bell-ringing woman as a regular, albeit single spawn, enemy. And that of course means that I can be invaded. And so it's for this reason that almost right away you see me use a trick that I've been using since Dark Souls 1. I selected the Bold Hunter's Mark on my hotbar. You can only use the Bold Hunter's Mark when you're alone in your world, that is to say when you haven't summoned anyone or you're not being invaded. So while there's sometimes false positives, when this item becomes unusable, you're probably about to be invaded. And it buys you something like 4 or 5 seconds, but sometimes that awareness can make all the difference in the world. In this case, I knew not to progress any further than I already had because I was about to be invaded. What I didn't know was that I was about to be invaded by the worst type of player. That is, someone who sees themselves as cleverly trolling others, but also someone who is woefully unaware of their own beastly idiocy. But yeah, this person, invades something you generally do when you want to engage in PvP and actually fight other people. But this player seemed, for whatever reason, again, thinking that they're cute and that they're going to troll, that they were going to dance around and run away, and as soon as I actually landed some significant damage on this beastly idiot, they ran into the enemies. And of course, I wanted to engage with these enemies for the first time in the context of the playthrough so I could talk about what it was we were seeing. So I sat down and waited, and then the invader came back, decided dancing around, and then finally kind of engaged in a duel. So as you can probably tell by the tone of my voice, and this is post-commentary by the way, because I stopped doing live commentary altogether because I got so flustered, annoyed, and angry at that invader. Because when I troll other people, and I'll leave a link to the only Bloodborne PvP troll video I've made so far, but it's one that I put an enormous amount of time, effort, thought into. I think that a good troll, is one where the mark actually enjoys the troll. They think to themselves, wow, that was actually pretty clever. They really got me. Well done. Whereas this person, there was no thought there. They were just, oh, I'll just dance around and use gestures and then run into the enemies. That's not a troll, it's just being a stupid player. But with all that aside, that had the unfortunate side effect of kind of, just really getting me annoyed and taking me out of the mood to want to do commentary. So I decided that what I was going to do was I was going to rush through the area, but then with the specter of an invasion gone, I could just explore the area in full. But invasions are a part of the game, and I'm not sure how I feel about playing offline, but I would like those of you out there who are watching to maybe chime in and say what it is you want me to do in situations like that. I'll do whatever the consensus is that people want to see, but I would like to hear your thoughts on that. Now, with all that aside, let's talk about this thing here. This Winter Lantern, as it's called. Notice first that even looking at the Winter Lantern builds up our frenzy meter, indicating that we're looking at something which is almost certain to test the tensile strength of our mental state. And given the amount of insight we've amassed, our mental state is particularly sensitive. Put more crudely, you could say that there's something quite literally mind-blowing about the Winter Lantern. Now, what could that be? Well, shortly after the game's release, a post was made on the Bloodborne subreddit by a redditor named Chimchuri, who posted a side-by-side image showing that the Winter Lanterns are almost certainly wearing the doll set. Adding to that, as Redgrave pointed out in his most recent Little Things in Yharnam video, the name Winter Lantern doesn't translate especially well from Japanese to English, referring indirectly as it does to a Buddhist Japanese custom called the Bon Festival. Now, I know next to nothing about any of this, so please accept my apologies in advance, and I welcome any corrections of any inaccuracies that I'm about to propagate. But this description comes almost entirely from Wikipedia, where it says that the Bon Festival is said to end with Toro Nagashi, or the floating of lanterns, whereby paper lanterns are illuminated and then drift down the river to symbolize that the ancestral spirits are returning to the world of the dead. In other words, if we're to accept the validity of these connections, and they do seem like valid connections, the doll would seem to have been tasked with guiding these spirits of the dead. We'll definitely be talking more about the Winter Lanterns and the doll later on, but I just found this series of connections so incredibly interesting that I had to bring it up, however briefly and problematically. So, in returning to the question of where we are, where exactly are we? Well, as we learned earlier on, we were just in the lecture hall of the School of Mensis. But there's another question that we should probably be asking. That is, in addition to where are we, we should also be asking, when are we? As the Dreamlands don't seem to be bound by the normal restrictions of space and time, this would seem to be a largely meaningless question. And with that said, we seem to have just been in the lecture hall, a place that seems to have been frozen at the point in time during which the nightmare was originally beckoned by the School of Mensis. So where are we now? And perhaps more importantly, when are we? Well, according to Redgrave, quote, "The nightmare appears to be a reflection of the ravaged Thumerian land of Loran, as evidenced by the fact that silver beasts wander the frontier and that Amygdala drops the ailing Loran chalice. The Hunter's Dream is obviously Gehrman's abandoned workshop. They are all places so very similar to their locations in the waking world, only slightly different." Redgrave later describes the differences in this way. Quote, "The Dreamlands are a location that exists parallel to our own world. They have a landscape just like we do, only they play by slightly different rules. Teleportation is just another method of transportation in the Dreamlands. The Dreamlands exist directly parallel to our own waking world. While the waking world is the domain of humanity, the Dreamlands are the lands of the Great Ones. These two worlds exist like a reflection of one another." So to sum up, where are we? The Thumerian land of Loran. When are we? Well, this nightmare would seem to represent a really late stage in the decline of this once great civilization, before the land became buried underground to form what we now know as the Chalice Dungeons, but after the land was seemingly decimated by, what else? The Scourge of the Beasts. This way to witness a miracle. And so perhaps lending further credence to my suggestion that these messages come not only from Paleblood hunters, but also from anyone who's in commune with the messengers. And so, if we're to believe that Patches left this message, then that would seem to indicate that Patches is in commune with the messengers. Very interesting.
Don't dally, you lucky scamp! The gift of the Godhead cometh!
Now finally, with all that other stuff out of the way, we've basically just one subject left to discuss, one major enemy left to fight, that is Amygdala. One of the false gods of Bloodborne, or perhaps the false god, if we're to connect the things we saw outside of Oedon Chapel to the boss of this area. There's much more to discuss with respect to Amygdala, such as the neuroscientific bases for that name, but we're going to save that for our discussion of the Defiled Chalice Dungeon. For now, it just occurred to me that the official guide's naming convention for the lesser Amygdala makes sense. That is, while Amygdala appears to be a great one, its blood is in fact red, like that of lowly humans and beasts. That could be said to indicate that Amygdala is not in fact a great one, and is instead a false god. Just an interesting possibility to think about for now, but I'm looking forward, as always, to hearing what each of you think about Amygdala, and anything else I've discussed in this episode for that matter. So just about as I expected that would be, although it wasn't pretty, to be sure. It wasn't a great boss fight, but pretty much a cakewalk given how incredibly over-leveled I am. But we did pick up the Aegon Chalice, which is one of the large reasons we came here. A chalice that breaks a labyrinth seal. Loran is a tragic land that was devoured by the sands. The tragedy that struck this ailing land of Loran is said to have its roots in the Scourge of the Beast. Some have made the dreaded extrapolation that Yharnam may be next. In other words, history seems to be repeating itself. And this nightmare would seem to be a representation of ailing Loran. But that's something we're going to be talking about a lot more in our next Chalice Dungeon centric episode. We will return back here to explore a little bit more to loot the rest of the items. But for now, I just wanted to get the boss defeated so we could get the Aegon Chalice. And also so that when we come back here to actually explore, we won't be bothered and interrupted by invaders who think that their trolls are clever when really they're not. Okay, before I get to the comments for this week, I wanted to say that I know that I spend a lot of time talking about Redgrave and directing everyone to his videos. And the reasons for that are fairly obvious, but most notable among them is he's the person from whom I've learned the most about the story of Bloodborne. With that said, I'm going to try and do my best to spread the love, so to speak. Now, for the reasons I've just provided, I'm probably still going to reference Redgrave multiple times per episode, but I am going to do my best to point out when other members of the community have published lore-related Bloodborne videos that I think deserve more attention, of which there are more than a few, but this week we've only time for one. So on August 14th, Neo-Loki published an absolutely spellbinding video called Ghosts of the Uncivil Dead. As of the moment I'm recording this commentary, this video has a criminally low view count of about 115. Now, while I don't know Neo-Loki personally, I do know him well enough to know that he didn't create this video for the views. He made it because he enjoys creating art. And there's really no better way to describe this video. It is truly a work of art. He describes it as a Bloodborne poem, and it's set to a wonderfully edited and beautifully shot montage of video and music. But for a video like this, no description I can give will suffice. So just go watch it yourself. It's about 4 minutes long, and just blast the sound, turn down the lights, and watch it on, the best piece of video equipment you have, because it really is just a wonderful, wonderful video. And if you enjoy it, let Neo-Loki know, because I know firsthand from the wonderful comments I get from all of you that when you put a ton of work into a project, and he put a ton of work into this video, it really does mean a lot. It really makes a huge difference to hear people express their gratitude for that, and to hear what they liked or even what they didn't like about it. But yeah, Neo-Loki put a ton of work into this video, and it's too beautiful not to be seen by more people. So go check it out. On to the comments, and I do have one from that I meant to get to last week, but I somehow skipped over, from Jerks Sans Frontières, and I had somewhat of an epiphany moment with that name about a week ago, and it's kind of sad because as someone who lives in Canada and has his whole life, I had 10 years of, publicly funded French lessons that as a child I used as kind of my time to just putter about and, slack off and have fun. And now as an adult, I regret that more and more as the years go on. But Jerks sans frontières seems in French to be jerks without borders or jerks without boundaries. So Jerks sans frontières, I hope you don't mind if I refer to you in the English form of your name, if indeed that is what you're going after. If not, I'm going to have even more egg on my face. But yeah, it's better than me butchering the French pronunciation. So Jerks Without Borders made a comment on the topic of the Keeper of the Old Lords, and Jerks writes that they were Thumerians whose bodies were burned away, leaving only their ash armor. They guard the old ones, so I presume by that they mean the great ones. And I know there's a lot of confusion because it was the old one in Demon Souls, and here and there in this game they actually refer to them as the great old ones or the old great ones. So it's understandable to make that error. But they guard the great ones and have an affinity for both fire and katanas. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like the Shadows of Yharnam? So Jerks Without Borders goes on to say that the shadows are one of the more baffling elements of the game, but if you view them as above ground equivalents of the Keepers, they kind of make sense. The first encounter is in the Forbidden Grave, and so the reason I'm reading, even though I guess I kind of disagree with the thesis statement for reasons I'll lay out in a minute, I do like this part here. So the first encounter is in the Forbidden Grave. Whose grave, Jerks has no idea, but it's a big dugout area near Bergenworth. And yeah, that's not something I had really thought about, but it seems possibly like the Forbidden Grave is one of, if not the entrance, the physical entrance to the Chalice Dungeons. And that's not something we've talked about a great deal, but once again, the Dreamlands and the Waking Worlds, they can be said to exist in parallel to each other, and or that the lines separating them are irrevocably blurred. But I do like the idea that there is a physical entrance to the Chalice Dungeons, to the old underground labyrinth. But where I would kind of depart from Jerks Without Borders theory here is that the Shadows of Yharnam, their name is kind of a clever play on words, because they would seem very much to be the bodyguards of Yharnam, the Thumerian queen. So we find them where? First at the Forbidden Grave. Not, in my opinion, because they're guarding the Forbidden Grave, but because they are shadowing Yharnam, the Thumerian queen. And she is, at that moment, either heading towards or in the Moonside Lake. So she's gone through Bergenworth, and so they are there to keep people seemingly from coming near Yharnam, the Thumerian queen, not the city. So in that sense, the rest of your post, while it is very interesting and would certainly be plausible, we do also find the Shadows of Yharnam in the Nightmare of Mensis, where, once again, right before, in your comment it says, the shadows acting as keepers show up because you trespass on their forbidden ground. The second encounter occurs in the Nightmare of Mensis, where they're guarding the Wet Nurse, who's a great one. They could also be said to be guarding Yharnam, because Yharnam's there, so you find the shadows all throughout the lead up and the path to where Yharnam is standing. Now granted, they're not especially adept at their duties, they're not very good bodyguards, and so maybe, there's a similarity in terms of their affinity for fire and, the types of weapons they use and the fact that they're humanoid player models. But I'm not entirely sure whether they're any more than simply bodyguards of Yharnam, the Thumerian queen. But I am interested to hear what and any of you think. If you agree or disagree with Jerks Without Borders, I'd be very interested in hearing that and why. Next, we have a comment from Leo with some speculation about Dark Beast Parl. And this isn't something I thought about at all either, and it seems almost obvious, but it's brilliant at the same time. That it looks almost as if Parl may have originated in the basement of the temple. I can't pronounce it. Hypogean in the temple where we spawned in Yahar'gul, the unseen village. In one of the prison cells, the iron bars are pulled apart as if something tried to escape. And in the floor above, the floor leading to Parl's area, we walk through a crude tunnel that looks as if it had been dug out by an animal. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And that's something that now that you've pointed that out, I feel almost embarrassed that I didn't notice that myself. That Parl seems to have transformed into a dark beast in that cell while being held in Yahar'gul, the unseen village, and seems to have crawled its way into the boss room, and then for whatever reason just kind of passed out there, I guess because there was nowhere else to go. But very, very interesting, and a seemingly obvious piece of implicit storytelling that is very easy to miss. So thank you, Leo, for that very much. 2.0 also echoes my excitement about this comment, but then points out that Dark Beast Parl drops the Spark Hunter badge, indicating that one of Archibald's friends, or perhaps Archibald themselves, could have turned into a Dark Beast, or could in fact be Dark Beast Parl. This is something I didn't talk about in the previous episode, and I probably should have, but I just wasn't sure. It seems almost too obvious a connection. Okay, he drops this item, so therefore he's this person. But I honestly can't think of any other explanation for it. But 2.0 goes on to say that Archibald could have been eaten by or one of Archibald's friends could have been eaten by the Dark Beast. And Leo points out that, or Leo replies by saying that he doesn't think Parl can eat anything for some reason. And I would agree with this as well, because there's no stomach, at least that I've seen, with Dark Beast Parl, or the Loran Dark Beast, which we are going to talk about in an upcoming episode, and talk a little bit more about Dark Beast more generally in the next episode as well. But yeah, I would agree that because Parl seems to be just nothing but bones and fur and electricity, so I don't know if there's any eating going on there, but I could be wrong about that. Steven Swartz says that he never noticed the apparent scar on the statue behind the Carol Rune bench, and indicating perhaps that it's a hint to how Carol Runes are equipped, because the bench that we use to equip them is awfully bloody. Maybe. That would seem to throw a wrench in my whole speech about how they specifically use the word mind and not brain, and that the mind isn't necessarily something physical. So maybe by mind they simply meant brain. And if you look at the Rune Workshop tool, I believe it is, the image for it, it looks like a brand. So, and that's something that Redgrave pointed out in one of his videos as well. So, just another Redgrave plug in case you hadn't had enough already. But yeah, that is very interesting, and certainly seems plausible. Jerks Without Borders also had a really long comment on the last episode, on episode 7. So I might not be able to cover every part of the comment, but I did want to draw on a couple bits. So first, in continuing on with this scar on the statue behind the workshop bench, but also throughout the Chalice Dungeons. That's something I meant to mention with respect to the previous comment. That statue isn't just looming over the bench for equipping the Carol Runes. It's also throughout the Chalice Dungeons. As Jerks Without Borders points out, in the story of Bloodborne, the Healing Church is obviously, one of the inspirations for kind of designing the Healing Church and creating the lore around it, that Miyazaki and FromSoft in general took a lot of cues from Jerks Without Borders as Christianity, but especially Catholicism, Catholicism. There's a lot of parallels there. And Jerks Without Borders draws on that to say that maybe they're not scars, but they could also be a crown of thorns, so that perhaps whomever is represented by that statue is atoning for some great sin, whether of their own doing or that of humanity more generally. And recall that the Great Ones are said to be sympathetic in spirit. So perhaps if indeed that statue is meant to symbolize or represent the doll, more evidence that the doll is perhaps herself or itself a great one. Jerks Without Borders also drew our attention to the original Project Beast trailer, which you can see about 50 seconds in, and I'll cut in a shot of it here, that the player is shoving a glowing sword or a rod into one of those statues. And so it's only seen from the back, but it does look a lot like, and it does in fact look a lot like the ones that we've been discussing. And so whatever, Jerks Without Borders goes on to say that whatever this mechanic was got removed from the final version, but it suggests that the statues were originally a lot more significant. Given that Dark Souls 3 shows the player creating bonfires using corpses in a similar fashion, these statues may have originally served the purpose that lanterns do now. I absolutely love the first bit, and I'm amazed that you remembered that bit from the trailer. But I would probably disagree with the second half of this part of the comment, because the animation looks very similar to me to that which you see in the second DLC of Dark Souls 2, the Crown of the Iron King, of the Old Iron King, when you get the Scorching Iron Scepter and you place it into one of the towers to fire up that tower. So in other words, what if I had to completely speculate about this, because of course this is all speculation, I would assume that the mechanic that was removed may have been in the Chalice dungeons in order to proceed into the boss area, that maybe you had to get a key item of some sort, and then rather than just flipping a switch and then using that to open the door, that you had to actually insert the key into the statue to open the door. But that is no more likely than your explanation, but interesting nonetheless. Speaking of things that were seemingly cut from the game, Jerks Without Borders suggests that Jura asking you to swear to defend Old Yarnum and the presence of an NPC hunter there suggests a scrapped Covenant idea. And that makes so much sense that it hurts so incredibly, incredibly much. Because that would be so cool to have Old Yarnum as sort of the Darkroot Garden or the Bell Tower equivalent in Bloodborne. And that would have been wonderful. But if indeed there was one there, and if they had time, they probably thought that Old Yarnum was hard enough with Jura shooting you to begin with, that adding players to that mix would probably make it just frustratingly hard. And I had a hard enough time, for anyone who's seen my blind playthrough, going through that area as it was. So to add invaders to that mix would probably be a little bit of overkill, but had they rebalanced it, that would have been just such an incredible, and it would have got a long way to fixing a lot of the problems with Bloodborne's PvP. And finally, Jerks Without Borders drew my attention to a wonderful lecture by an author whose name I'm probably going to mispronounce, China Meville. And he's a writer in the Lovecraftian tradition, writes Jerks Without Borders, who's also done a lot of theorizing about Lovecraft from a Marxist perspective. So if any of my discussions in past episodes about Marxism were of interest to you, this one will really, really blow your mind. It's a wonderful, I believe it's about 30 minutes, just a fantastic, fantastic talk to listen to. You can put it on your MP3 player, you're going to the gym, or just, riding the subway or something, and listen to it. And it's a really interesting, entertaining listen, and, the lecturer isn't, a dull person. It's pretty funny, it's lighthearted, but also, really serious, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. So I just wanted to pass on that recommendation. Really, really interesting listen. On the subject of the broken lamp in the chapel of Yahar'gul, the Unseen Village, Marty26 writes that he always assumed that the three hunters there, so that is after the Nightmare of Mensis has been beckoned, that the three hunters there were responsible in an attempt to keep Paleblood hunters away from their business. Although Marty always assumed the lamps were not physical things in Yarnum and only appeared for dreaming hunters. So this brings the question, did a dreaming hunter do it, and for what reason? quite like the idea that Mensis maybe had members who were connected to the dream to keep track of hunters who might disturb their work. Very, very interesting, and again, a rather obvious kind of solution to the problem that I raised in episode 6, in the Hail the Nightmare episode, or perhaps it was episode 7. Sorry that my mind is kind of a blank slate right now. I've been recording and writing and researching all day, so apologies for that. But I do like this idea a lot, and it does lead me to think a little bit about the lamps. And perhaps it's as simple as insight, that as we've seen throughout this episode and in the previous one, there are things that are there, they're real, but you can't see them if you don't have enough insight to see them. So perhaps that's what's going on here. But that, you still see the lamps when you have 0 insight. So maybe there's, some sort of base insight that the Paleblood Hunter, and maybe that's the requirement to be a Paleblood Hunter, that you need to have a certain inherent natural ability, intelligence, insight, to be able to see things like the lamps. Maybe to be able to find your way into that clinic, into Iosefka's clinic with the Blood Minister to begin with. Maybe there's an insight-related requirement to that aspect of the game. I don't know, but it's very interesting, and given the shape that the lamp is that we find when we return to Yahar'gul, the Unseen Village, it would seem to make sense that the lamp was broken, and maybe it was broken by someone who just wasn't a Paleblood Hunter but had lots of insight and could see the lamp and perceive it. Or maybe it was broken by someone who was once a Paleblood Hunter and knew it was there. Don't know. Very interesting, though. Rix brought up the fact that if you look at the item description for the Yahar'gul Hunter set, that it emphasizes, as I read out in episode 7, that it's only strong in physical defense and not much else. And if you think about it, the executioners, or the just hunters of Yahar'gul more generally, would only need to defend against mortals and their weapons, since they are essentially kidnapping them, and wouldn't have to worry for the kin or other beasts. Very, very, and I've said that like 15 times in the last 20 minutes, but again, very interesting. And a really powerful demonstration of the ways in which the stats of particular items in this game also give additional lore, and are also consistent with the lore significance of those items. Another example that I haven't really talked about, although I really should have, is the fact that the Madman set has the lowest insight, or the lowest frenzy resistance in the game. Why? Because that person learned so much, their mind, once again, is literally bursting at the seams. They've gone mad. And so it would make sense that that would be reflected in their gear. But we'll talk about that more later. So yeah, this is probably going to be the longest episode to date. I am going to try and complete one more in the next week, so we might actually have 2 episodes of Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore this week. And the reason for that is quite simply that the school year is starting in, at the time of recording, a little less than 2 weeks. And I'm going to be teaching once again and working on my comprehensive examinations, so my time will be a little bit more limited. I'm still going to do my best to get out a minimum of 1 episode a week, but I do hope you will all forgive me if I wind up having to delay an episode here and there based on how much I have going on in my professional and academic careers. But that's going to do it for this episode, so thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye!
Hunters are killers, nothing less. You call me a beast? A beast? What would you know? I didn't ask for this.